to our first Mental Health at Work Friday session. As I've shared, this is a series we're kicking off in 2023, having conversations while we lunch on Fridays so we can think about creating psychologically healthy workplaces. And just like she did for me on the podcast series we did, the Psychological Safety World Tour, Sundari has graciously agreed to be my first guest. And it is what time where you are right now, Sundari?
It's 12:33 a.m.
So she
But it's a Saturday, remember that. And I take my weekends seriously, so I will sleep in after this.
For those who don't know me, my name is Allessandria Polizzi. I'm the CEO of Verdant Consulting. We focus on creating psychologically healthy and safe workplaces. And Sundari, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Soundri Mukherjee. I'm based out of Hong Kong. But as we see, we all live the global life. I'm an organizational consultant, and my big, hairy, audacious goal is to help leaders and teams drive business outcomes, build a personal brand, and be more human at work through storytelling.
Which is a fantastic way for us to talk about mental health at work, because one of the things that we're both passionate about is about creating authentic and thriving and high-performing workplaces. So Sundari, let's just kick it off right now. When you think about mental health at work, why would that be of interest to someone who does the work that you do?
Yeah. I talked about being more human at work, right? So I think building the skills to tell stories and share experiences has the power to change the way we look at the world. And that can inspire action. It can transform societies. And I look at it not just at an organizational level, but it can help make the world a more equal place for all of us. And when we share those personal anecdotes, especially at work, you get a glimpse of that person, a sneak peek into who you are, other than your designation, other than your role, other than the corporate hat that you wear. And that helps build authentic connections, and it changes the quality of the conversations that you have. So in the work that I do with organizations in terms of crafting strategies, communicating impactfully within and outside the organization, this really is the vein that runs across.
You know, it's interesting. So you mentioned about business outcomes, right? During business outcomes. How does storytelling, creating authenticity, what does that have to do with business outcomes in your mind?
Yeah. I think we tend to think of ourselves as thinking creatures, but we are emotional creatures who also think. And I think building those connections and, organizations are having a tough time with change right now, right? And it's just getting tougher, figuring out hybrid, figuring out change management, D, E, I, and B, employee engagement, being customer. All these are words that we know, and they tend to be words that are written on the wall or values that go on the wall if we don't translate them into actions and behaviors. So the storytelling thread is what shows the work in action. And when you see that work in action, you're driven to inspire, you're driven to also be influenced into motivating people into driving outcomes. And that's the base level linkage. But I'm sure you'll add to it, and the others in the call might want to also add to that.
Yeah, so I had this conversation yesterday. I think Jackie was on the call actually, where someone asked about how do we make the business case for investing in mental health or the humans at work. And there's so much robust data on the cost of not doing it. But I haven't really seen as much data. I mean, that's not true. I've seen a ton of data on psychological safety and better outcomes as far as increased innovation, increased creative thinking, increased problem solving, like 78% increase in a willingness to learn new skills. One of the things if you've been in one of my presentations, you've probably seen me share, there's a McKinsey study from 2021 that showed that 70% of employees will not raise an issue when they see it. And think about the business impact. I mean, I'm not good at math. but if we're missing 70% of the issues in our business, I'm guessing we're not performing at our best, right? So how do you think about making the quantitative point of view when it comes to the humans in the workplace? Because humans are hard to measure, right?
Yeah. I think it just shows out in how the companies are going to turn out. For instance, I remember that when Steve Sadoff took over Clairol in 1991, the company had had a shell shock, significant decline in sales volume. And he remembers saying that, I remember going to a very creative person who did all the packaging and the creative development. And Steve would say, why aren't we doing anything creative anymore? So that's actually going to the ground, not sitting in your ivory tower, but going to the ground and finding those stories. And this creative person just opened some of the drawers in his desk and started showing Steve all that wonderful work that he had done. And nobody was asking for it. So people then end up putting their head down in that kind of a culture. So as a leader, as somebody, you have to just let go of your place in your cubicle, cabin, ivory tower, and just go down and talk to people and find out how can I create an environment that allows innovation and creativity to take place, where it's okay to fail. And those happen when you touch your feet to the ground there. And you can see the trend changing once you're aware of these kind of things. Oh, okay. I thought I was walking the talk on that. I'm clearly not. So what do I do now to change that culture forward? So when we say outcomes, it shows in every step of how the organization behaves. And we tend to talk of some of these as, hiring strategies or recruitment strategies, but it's actually a retention strategy. If I can just add on, I was just remembering as I was speaking, Frances Frey, if I'm getting her name right, Frei, the Harvard Business School professor, she and Anne Morris have written a book called Unleashed. And she talks about, how people, leaders especially, need to go down on the ground and ask the teams, what is it that I can do to make your life better here? And she talks about a particular incident where the nurses in a particular hospital were leaving disproportionately. They said, what's going on here? Is it just long hours? Is it the boss who's being really, crazy? But what they found out was, and I'm going to really ask, take a guess. Why do you think the nurses were leaving? Anyone just want to pitch
yeah,
in?
what does the group think? Any guesses from the group? Why would nurses be leaving? It wasn't long hours.
It wasn't long hours. It wasn't just that.
Compassion fatigue.
That's a good one, but in this case, it wasn't that.
Jackie actually comes from healthcare.
And part of that is the lower threshold for tolerance with competing priorities from their managers that are being pulled between patient care and revenue operations.
That's a very, very valid thing to happen. I see, as my sister works in HR, and I can see empathy fatigue, definitely being a thing. But in this case, it wasn't that.
Okay, you're going to tell us. Oh, Chris, you're going to guess.
I was going to guess, although
yeah,
I would say, is there potentially a lack of appreciation for what they're doing?
All normal, very legitimate reasons. In this case, it was broken copiers. The nurses at the end of the shift had to go up and down the stairs.
You weren't going to have us
looking
on that,
for functional copiers. And as they were going up and down the steps, they were looking at each other and rolling their eyes.
They were like,
saying,
this is
oh yeah. Oh yeah, we are very valued here. We are very valued employees and we are running around doing this. So sometimes we tend to think, and it is all legitimate reasons, we tend to think of something really big, but it could be something really small. So they talk about actually going and sitting with your team and asking them to make a list of indignities. Take a fresh piece of paper, take a pen, go sit down with your team and ask them, what are some of the indignities that it could be bathrooms, it could be coffee machines. And solving some of this is going to help with the retention. take a pen, write it down, and then deal with it.
Yes. Well,
So-
so that is such a great story. I'm going to totally steal it. And so you anticipate seeing that in a presentation coming shortly. But so if you look at the World Health Organization's guidelines for creating mentally healthy workplaces, right? And also ISO 45003, which both of which we lean on for all the work we do. That having the right resources and tools is actually identified as what's called a psychosocial hazard. In other words, that the lack of the proper equipment accelerates burnout, accelerates the mental health risks within the workplace. A great example of this was the lack of proper equipment at the beginning of the pandemic. So healthcare workers who did not have the equipment they needed, then this just makes a ton of sense, had exponentially higher, there was a research study done on this, exponentially higher incidence of depression, anxiety, and other mental health crises. So that's in the World Health Organization guidelines. And that's why they say, start there. Start by looking at the structures in your organization, those psychosocial hazards, so that you have a foundation that's not working against you. Because they could say for the nurses, we're going to give you a retention bonus. We're going to take you to free lunch Fridays or whatever. We're going to throw all the things at you from an engagement point of view. And you're going to be like, yeah, but you didn't fix the copier, right? So that's a great story. That's a great story. I want to go back to one of the things we were talking about, though, and I'm curious to hear from the group since we're such a small group today. We know that leaders need to make connection with people. I mean, who hasn't heard of managing by walking around? Okay. So, and I can say this as somebody who has led large teams. When you do that, if you don't know what to do when you do that, right, there's a sense of, I believe that there's a sense of fear that can happen in making connections with people. But I'm curious from the group, what do you think holds people back from deprioritizing that managing by walking around, that making connection with people, having their feet touch the ground? I love that, Sundari. That's like beautiful. And at midnight, yeah,
I would
lack
say
of
lack
time.
of-
But
lack
Bill,
of time for
you know,
sure.
you know what you make time for, you know what you don't, right? So you got something done today, and that was not the thing. So why doesn't it make the cut?
I mean, I'll speak for me, but it's why does it make a cut? Because you're always prioritizing things, right? And so, at least in my world, there is definitely competing priorities. And I made the choice today, like for this meeting, to deprioritize 5 other things, put it aside, and attend this meeting. So it's always a choice, but it's always competing priorities, and oftentimes making those connections and doing things that probably help you personally get shoved all the way down to the bottom. The things
Yes.
that are more time sensitive, that need to be done by a certain day, by the end of the month, by the end of the week, but whatever. And we push our own needs and all the way down to the very bottom.
Yeah. I wonder, and I'm making this up, so I cannot just whatever. But I wonder if part of it is, the saying, what gets measured gets done, right? And making personal connections, as we talked about, difficult to measure. So if there's not but the thing that I have to turn in today, that's binary. I either did or I didn't. And that has visibility also. So
Bingo.
I wonder if that might be part of it too.
If I could give a mug to every HR manager, every business leader, everyone, mug would say people over paperwork. So, I think people are today hungering for that interaction, the opportunities to connect. So managers do need to carve out the time to help workers get to know each other, to strengthen this social bond. We talked about, in a different conversation, we talked about, really picking up that social courage to go and have that interaction, taking the time to get to know the people with you. We are all in groups. Today we'll connect this way. What happens forward? Do we continue the interaction, say, with Bill and Christine and Jackie, or is it just happening now and it's a touch point? We don't have time to process this. We are all jumping into 100 different things after this. and it's forgotten. So really taking that time, being more mindful and creating those spaces so that people have the time. And I think the onus is definitely also on the leader to be that role model, to have the courage to go and do it and invest the time. And it takes time. It's not going to happen on a call. It's not going to happen in one meeting. It's not going to happen in 2 meetings. It's going to take 6 months to do it. But acknowledge it and take it and invest that kind of time. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, and I just feel that we don't value the time that we need to put on this. We are all into that instant gratification and quick fix kind of a world. Bill mentioned quick fix part of it. Totally with you, Bill, on that. I mean, that's what we're all looking for at some good, fast, cheap kind of a thing, right?
But Bill, I like what you're putting in the chat there. If you wouldn't mind coming off mute for a second. You know, when we focus on retention, this makes the cut. Can you say more about that?
Well, you said measure what matters.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when people prioritize people, it mattered.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, one of the, I mean, something I do in my work is often, you know, I talk about the return on learning. And I talk, because people talk about ROI, and I go, so what are you measuring? You know, where's the dollars? Sick days, wellness, OSHA fines, retention, you know, those all cost something. So, you know, if you value that and you really want to bring it back to the hard dollars for the people that have erasers at the end of their pencils, then you'd bring it back to their language that makes them care.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so part of that is this organization that I was involved in was having a real attrition process problem. And then so we came back and said, you know, so what matters? And it's like, you know, if you want to keep people, what's the value proposition for them?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so to leaders, we said, you know, get your fannies out there.
So
If
true.
I can piggyback onto what Bill's saying, as somebody who would be receiving some of those surveys and stay interviews and assessment scores, is I think what happens is we start with good intent to do these assessments and surveys, and then we look at the lowest percentage points for the greatest opportunity improvement versus looking at departments that fall under leadership such as Bill's, or I have a couple of other leaders that come to mind who by nature should have a higher turnover by frontline roles. However, their engagement and retention is much greater than in other areas. So let's start asking why, how, approach, behaviors, skills, and then identify that ROL to contrast and reflection for those surveys that you're conducting and making a business case that way.
I want to just throw one thing in. That is a great point. It's sometimes it's the data that is not highlighted that actually has more value. And I'll bring an old story, you know, so I'm a process guy. And there's a story that comes back from World War II that they did a big study about about bombers that were coming back with bullet holes in them. If you've heard the story, tell me to stop and I'll stop. But and so what they came back was they said, well, look at all these bullet holes. You know, we'll reinforce those areas and see that so they don't get shot and they can come back. And so they did that, and that didn't change really the attrition rate of those men in the planes. And somebody came back, and I wish I could remember this guy's name, but he was a process engineer way long ago. Came back and said, let's look at the numbers again. Let's see on the planes that came back where they didn't get shot. Mm-hmm. And what they came back was because the hypothesis that he brought was maybe on these planes, the reason they came back is because they didn't get shot there. And the ones that didn't come back got shot there. Mm-hmm. So they reinforced those areas that they didn't get shot. And there more planes came back, more men came back safely. Mm-hmm. So it's the data that isn't obvious sometimes that I think, you know, it goes back to the Disney question of you know, what time, the most commonly asked question in Disney, what time is the 2 o'clock parade? I'm not asking what time it is. They know that. What's the real question being asked? The perfect service question that people are trained to learn is, what's the question behind the question?
Mhm,
Am I standing in the right place? Can my kids see the princess? You know, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. So
mhm.
it's the data that's not obvious that I think sometimes drives this. And that takes us back to the people and what perhaps they're not saying that matters more.
Mhm. Good stories. Thanks, Bill. Can I share a story? So we talked about getting these surveys. I've had at least 2 situations, 2 different companies, 2 different parts of the world where we've received the surveys. The executive team reads them. It makes them feel bad. And they want to find out who said what. And they want to rationalize why the answers are what they are so that they can feel better about themselves. It's just very transparent to me. And I think that what that is that if you look again at the World Health Organization, one of the hazards to mental health is leading other people. And we don't equip leaders with the skills to monitor and recognize when that's showing up for them. So then this is the kind of behavior we see, right? Is defensiveness, unwilling to walk out and talk to people because they might say something I don't like, or not open to other people's ideas, or not willing to take feedback on how we could do things differently, or accept that maybe we're not good at something, those kinds of things. And so I think we talk about the influence of leaders. One of the things that we can teach them is how to build that courage, how to understand, oh, hey, I'm experiencing that hazard right now, and here's my plan for what to do about it. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
Or they just don't want to do the survey to begin with because they know that some of the feedback brought forth, they're not going to want to see. So they'd rather just not do it at all.
I have heard that, or we already know what people think. People already tell us, we already know.
Yeah, and if we put it to paper, that's just going to make it worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling with that right now, as you can tell.
I mean, I want to bring back what you mentioned about transparency, Al. I think it's that key part as well about being open to questions. Transparent leaders don't just limit the questions that they address. They are willing to have those hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
To say that, okay, if I hold a meeting, anyone is actually welcome to question the practice or policy in the organization. It's okay to do that. And that links up again to psychological safety, or creating that space to say, yeah, we know our policies are SHIT, and it's like, okay, but I'm okay to be questioned. I'm okay for, there's no place for me to just hide.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to work with you to find the answers for hard topics.
I think, feeding off of that for a second, I think it's okay I think it's also training our leaders, but also guiding our people in how to do that. And I say that because, there's the pitchfork mentality in culture where they come with pitchforks, and there is the approach, how to approach a situation, thinking big picture and thinking that, I have specific examples in my head and I'm gonna leave out, but it is what I don't think leaders respond well to is when the pitchforks come out, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You're doing this, you shouldn't be doing this. And they, obviously the employees don't have the same perspective as leaders running an entire organization. And so it never works well when it comes out in that way. So I love having a culture where people feel open and willing to ask more questions and, challenge things, or maybe have some insight for some improvement based upon things they've seen or how it resonated with them personally. But it's how they approach these situations it makes all the difference.
Absolutely. And so actually one of the things that we were supposed to talk to, so I'm glad it came up, was this idea of social workplace social courage, which is how do I, as an independent, as an individual, not just putting everything on the organization or the leader, but as an individual, create connections so that I take risks and I invest in the relationships. And the number one way that you can build courage is by understanding each other as humans, moving beyond the us versus them, people stuck in hierarchies or being a title. They're still humans. And so when we can get to know people as humans, it enables us to take more risks. And to think about that leader, if you're going after that leader as with pitchforks, to use your metaphor, that means you see that person as a monster. And for all their flaws, not a lot of people are monsters.
They're not. And I mean, some of these things also come out on things like Glassdoor, where like they become very courage driven in an anonymous way. But all it might have taken was a one-to-one with that leader, face to face. And you can solve so much, right?
Yes. And the leader being okay, also being vulnerable and being wrong and being a human, because these masks we put on, this expectation of what it is to be a leader has created this false sense of, perfection, knowledge about everything, being bulletproof. It's okay to have emotions and feelings. As a leader, it should be expected that some of these things are going to be a challenge. Oh my gosh, how did we get through 30 minutes?
I know, I have to run. I am so sorry, but thank you all for
really
that.
like what you said about the quality of the conversation. I think it links up to that. How do you change the quality of the conversation in the organization? And coaching for that, managers as coaches, talking to your teams, learning to do that, I think is a great vehicle behind it. So that's a wonderful point you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that they need to learn how to use language that opens people up versus talking at them and opening that conversation so that it is more of a conversation. I do think that, I have personally seen quite a bit of like the us versus them mentality, and it just creates a further divide. And I think we're probably all seeing a little bit more even in this virtual world more than we ever have.
Yep.
So
And
I have to jump for another meeting.
Nice to see you. Thanks for joining. For those interested, next week we have Jackie Johnson. She'll be joining me for the same bat time, same bat channel. So hopefully we'll see some of you then. Thanks again, Sundari.
I need to sign off as well. Thanks so much. Great
Thank you so
participation,
much.
everyone. I
Lovely
loved
to
learning
see
from each of
everyone.
you.
Bye.
You.